Hello everyone, my name is Tim Billow and I am reporting here from Genesee Park in South Seattle, and I am up in the top of a tree today. This is a lodgepole pine tree growing here in the park. Got a nice view out to Lake Washington this way. I don't know if you can see the lake, just barely a little peek through the trees there. Long way down to the ground. But I like being up in trees just so I can get a different perspective on life, and also so I can learn about what's actually in the tops of tall trees like this. And as luck would have it, I discovered back here, growing on this branch, a species of lichen that I haven't seen before in Seattle. This is called Hypogymnia tubulosa. A really cool lichen that actually is known to grow on pine trees, so maybe not surprising that I found it here. What is a lichen, you might be wondering? A lichen is a combination of organisms, in this case two organisms, a fungus and an alga, living together in symbiosis. And the really neat thing about lichens is that one species of organism, in a sense, defines the other. They can't survive without each other. They can't reproduce without each other. They have to reproduce in synchrony so that their progeny end up together. It's a remarkable relationship. The algae supplies the fungus with food, the products of photosynthesis, and the fungus provides the algae with a place to live. So I've been thinking about that. This is called a symbiotic relationship, and as long as I'm up here in the tree thinking about life in general, I've been thinking a lot about the symbiotic relationship, if you will, that humans have with Earth itself. And in a sense, how does the Earth define us, and how do we define the Earth? I think this is a critical question at the heart of sustainability. And as long as we're here in this place known today as Genesee Park, I should tell you a bit about the past history of this place. Formerly, this meadow, which is out here, used to be a wetland, and that wetland was connected to Lake Washington. In the past, about 100 years ago, 104 years ago to be precise, this wetland was still intact, and there was a salmon run that came up from the lake through the wetland and traveled up a creek that went all the way into the neighborhood known as Columbia City, and from there the creek flowed along Rainier Avenue and all the way up into today's Judkins Park. It was a long creek that ran through the heart of the city from the Central District south and then over to Lake Washington. And again, had one of the most important salmon runs in this area. And not surprisingly, there was a Duwamish village here at the site that's now Genesee Park. That village was known as Sac-at-Seed. And that name actually translates to fish cooking on stick, which tells you how important this area was for the Duwamish people. And as I mentioned, when the lake was lowered in 1916 through the building of the Ship Canal, which was built to enhance opportunities for commerce on the lake, but sadly, I think not surprisingly too, given the attitudes of that time, built also to cut off the Duwamish people from their way of living, their way of surviving here on this landscape. So this is a great tragedy, a great human tragedy, as well as an ecological tragedy. And I like to honor the Duwamish place names whenever I can. I think they're very evocative of the natural history of this area, and to remind ourselves of the great injustices that were done to the Duwamish people, the people who are still here in Seattle, still not recognized by the federal government, and the people whose cultures I think we can really learn a lot from, the cultures of indigenous people who have stewarded this land since time immemorial and whose cultures are inextricably tied to the land. cultures that are defined by the resources of that land, and cultures for whom sustainability is not an option. If you don't use your resources sustainably, then your culture dies. And I think we can learn a lot from the first peoples of this land who, again, stewarded this land for so many years in a sustainable way. And I think that's something that's lost in the mainstream culture of the United States and other parts of the world, places and cultures that really don't rely on resources in their immediate vicinity and don't actually have much sense at all of how everyday actions actually impact the sustainability of the earth. So I think, again, this is something we can all be thinking about, and this is a lesson that I derive from not only thinking about indigenous people and indigenous cultures, but also thinking about some of the natural relationships among organisms, such as that represented in the simple lichen that's growing here on the tree behind me.